Was the book of Revelation written in the 90s AD like it says when you Google it, or was it written in the 60s AD like history suggests? Today we will look at the biblical evidences that show that Christ's revelation to St. John was given in the 60s AD. John, right away in chapter 1 of Revelation, provides for us a theme, an outline, if you will, for the majority of the book. He says that Jesus, is coming on the clouds, that the eyes of those who pierced him would see him, and the tribes of the earth will mourn him. Generally, throughout the Bible, we see the cloud presence of God being one of judgment. Judgment upon whom? A futurist will take this to mean a global catastrophe, but we will see in a moment the verse actually points away from that idea. He then states those who pierced him will see him. So we have a few choices here. One, those who literally pierced him, the Romans. Two, those who caused his crucifixion, the first century Jews. Or three, figuratively, all of mankind, whose sins he died for. The end of the verse says, in many translations, the tribes of the earth will mourn him. Let's take a look at the Greek here. The Greek word translated earth here is ges, and when associated with the word tribes is largely concerning the promised land. So a better rendering might be the tribes of the land will mourn him. This points to the previous question of those who pierced him, pointing to the first century Jews. Throughout Revelation, when one is trying to determine its temporal setting, one will notice the same Greek word being used, taku, which means soon or at hand. The word is used 7 times in Revelation, and the way this is explained away by the futurist camp is when it occurs, it will happen quickly. We'll circle back to that one. Are we to assume that this is what is stated? John relays Jesus' message to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, and suddenly the setting is thousands of years later? In Matthew 24, in the parallel of the Olivet Discourse in Luke 21, Jesus says this generation will not pass away until all of these things take place. So what is a generation in a Jewish perspective? Let's look at that. The generation had to pass away before entering the promised land, and we see in Numbers 14:38, only 3 remained at that point. 40 years. Jesus gave this discourse somewhere between 30 and 33 AD. 40 years added to that would land us right on 70 AD, exactly the time his prophecy would come to pass. Atheists love to point this out as a supposed prophecy, false prophecy, and the futurists have trouble with it. Not so in the partial preterist view. So, what did Jesus refer to when he wrote of the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, referring to Daniel, of course? Luke tells us in Luke 21:20, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its desolation is at hand. Josephus records for us the siege laid by Rome against Jerusalem in a 6-volume history called Wars. And Daniel refers to the abomination being the desecration of the temple and worship of a foreign god, usually associated with Antiochus IV. Nero had the standards of Rome placed in the temple grounds for proxy worship, which became one of the triggers of the Jews rebelling in the 60s AD. Revelation 2 through 3, John relays Jesus' message to real churches in Asia Minor in the first century, interestingly listed in order of the postal routes of the time in Rome. These churches faced real persecution. So when Jesus refers to these events happening quickly, if you were hearing this message read to you in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, would you feel the message being of events occurring thousands of years later, yet addressed to you of much consolation? No, Jesus was addressing real people with results that would soon take place, and they did. It wasn't help is on the way in a few thousand years. We have another word used, angus, the Greek meaning near in Revelation 13 and 22:10. The same word describes the approaching summer in Matthew 24:32 and Passover in these verses. We also have the word mele, meaning to be or about to be, indicating immediate, urgent occurrence. All of these linguistic temporal indicators point toward the events happening soon, at hand, even now, not thousands of years in the future. How is it that those who pierced him, the tribes of the promised land, would mourn him thousands of years later? The persecution experienced by the seven churches of Asia Minor began primarily in 64 AD, resulting in the martyrdom of all but one apostle, John. This fulfilled Jesus' prophecy in Matthew 16:28, fulfilled by John surviving to the cloud coming of Christ in judgment. But the severe persecution was the most severe during Nero's reign, and though it continued under Domitian, it was nothing in comparison. Now, changing gears a bit, we must look at a very prevalent indicator of the time of Revelation's authorship, found in Revelation 17, the identity of the sixth king. We see a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, a beast who was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And then the verses are explained by the angel. The beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Rome was known colloquially as the city of 7 hills, and historically we have Suetonius and Plutarch who recorded the Septimontium, the feast of the 7-hilled city. Archaeologists have even discovered a coin made for Vespasian depicting Roma as a woman seated on 7 hills. Additionally, Rome was known as the Empire of 10 Kingdoms, or 10 Horns. Now, when the angel explains to John what he is seeing, he also describes them as 7 kings. In Revelation 17:10, we see 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. So what we need to find is a series of 7 kings, the 6th being the one who is alive when John wrote Revelation. So what does history reveal to us? We must logically begin with Julius Caesar and continue with all of those who held the title of Caesar. In Suetonius' work, The Lives of the 12 Caesars, he identifies Julius as the first. Josephus gives us this list as well in Antiquities 18. Julius, Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, also called Caligula, Claudius, and the 6th being Nero, followed by Galba. Nero died in June of 68 AD, and Galba reigned for a very short time, June 68 AD through January of 69 AD. Only 8 months. I've made a number of shorts pointing out indicators that Nero is the beast of Revelation, and I'd recommend giving those a look for more on that topic. Now, one thing we can't ignore in Revelation is the integrity of the temple. It is clearly present in Revelation. Question is, which one? If it is the second temple, well, easily explainable during the era of 64 to 70 AD, as it was standing and then ultimately destroyed. For the futurist, however, this requires the construction of a third temple. One question: if any of the books of the New Testament were written after 70 AD, why is there no mention of the destruction of the temple? Easily the most cataclysmic event in all of Judaism, rendering the ability to follow Deuteronomy and Leviticus impossible. Another question: if John wrote about literal Jerusalem 25 years after its destruction, why did he speak of it as if it were still standing? We see the same verbal parallels in Luke 21:24 and Revelation 11:2. The context of Luke 21:20 through 24 demands this: a literal Jerusalem seized by real armies in literal Judea by Gentiles. These events undisputedly occurred in 64 to 70 AD and is not even denied by those of futurist eschatology, atheist scholars, or anyone who studies Near East history at all. This is real and recorded history, you guys. No one denies it. No one. All right, guys, we've demonstrated that Nero was the 6th king of Revelation 17, so what other indicators point to him in Scripture? We come to the famous Revelation 13:18. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. In history, we find the use of a cipher in various cultures in the Hebrew called gematria, meaning mathematical. We see evidence preserved in the city of Pompeii in a cryptograph saying, I love her whose number is 545. In the Lives of the 12 Caesars by Suetonius, we have another 1st century record, a calculation new, Nero his mother slew. Nero's initial is mentioned in the Sibylline oracles. One who has 50 as an initial will be commander. Additionally, they even state for 8 units an equal number of tens in addition to these, and 800s will reveal the name, referencing Jesus, 888. Here we can see the common Hebrew and Aramaic spelling of Nero Caesar and how it calculates. Here it is. In some of the older King James Bibles, we find an interesting variation, 616. Why? Because the calculation is different when coming from Latin, but 616 is still the number for Nero Caesar in Latin. Now we come to the prophecy regarding the beast's death. In Revelation 13:10 through 14, that he be killed with the sword, yet comes back to life. Nero attempted suicide, but survived it, according to Suetonius. So we see this prophecy again fitting the bill regarding Nero. All right, let's rewind a bit. In Revelation 7, 1 through 8, we see a divine protection of the land by 4 angels holding back the winds of destruction. Every instance in these passages rendered earth are the Greek word ges, again, able to be rendered land. The catalyst is that the sealed bondservants must be marked by God. So now we get to the famous 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel being sealed. What do we see? The Jewish nation still existing and occupying its own land, that land exposed to an impending desolation, but 144,000 were to be exempt. Clearly, these are Christians, God intervening to protect them, as they are called bondservants of our God. They are in the land and contrasted from the great multitude from every nation who praise God, so it cannot mean the Gentile Christians. We also see it as not the entirety of the land that is protected. So, those from the tribes of the land must be those Messianic Jews, Christians, who escaped the judgment. In Matthew 24 and Luke 21, Jesus warns they should flee Judea to the mountains. And he had already warned previously in Matthew 3 when he said, "Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" The axe was already laid at the root of the tree. One last point. Why do we see so many people selling property in Jerusalem in the book of Acts? Perhaps because they understood that very soon, taking Christ's warning seriously, it wouldn't be worth very much anymore, would it? So there's certainly much more, but I think it would be of great value to point out some of my previous videos I've made exegeting Matthew 24. I want to say thank you for watching. If you're here to the end, thank you especially. And I hope this was edifying and helpful to you all. Grace and peace.